You never really know what your neighbors are capable of until it's too late to say thank you. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when Owen Williams opened his front door to find a bin bag sitting on his doorstep. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would change his family's life forever. Inside that bag, 14 Christmas presents, wrapped with care for his young daughter, Katie. But it wasn't the gifts that left Owen speechless. It was who they were from and the reason behind them. This isn't your typical holiday story, and what you're about to hear is going to stay with you long after the video ends. Stay with us to the end to learn the full story behind a gift that spanned over a decade, from a man they thought they'd lost forever. And don't forget to show your support for this touching tale by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, because stories like this remind us of the goodness that still exists in the world. Owen and Caroline Williams were living an ordinary life in Barry, South Wales. Like many families, they had their routines, their joys, and their share of challenges. Owen was managing director of a social agency, while Caroline worked as an assistant head teacher. Together, they had built a warm, loving home for their 2-year-old daughter, Katie. Life was simple, peaceful even, until their elderly neighbor, Ken Watson, entered their lives. Ken wasn't just any neighbor. He was the kind of person you couldn't miss, even if you tried. An eccentric old man with a sharp wit and a heart full of stories, he lived alone next door, his late wife having passed some years earlier. Ken was a man of contradictions, stubborn yet friendly, independent yet lonely, and he had a way of worming his way into your life without you even noticing. Owen first met Ken shortly after moving into the neighborhood. It was one of those ordinary days. Owen and Caroline were unpacking boxes, Katie napping in her crib, when they heard the sound of pop music blaring next door. Curious, Owen peeked over the garden fence and nearly dropped his cup of tea when he saw the source of the music. An elderly man perched precariously on a ladder, painting the side of his house while grooving to the beat of a tune far too modern for a man his age. "Should I call for help?" Owen muttered to himself, half joking. But before he could overthink it, Ken spotted him and waved enthusiastically from the top of the ladder. "Hey there, you're the new neighbor, right?" That was Ken, always full of surprises. Over the next few months, the Williams family got to know Ken well. He'd pop by with the occasional baked good or unsolicited advice about gardening. He was quirky, no doubt about it. But it wasn't until Katie came into the picture that they truly saw the depth of his character. Katie, their joyful, curious little girl, took to Ken immediately. She'd toddle over to the garden fence, grinning widely, whenever she spotted him outside. Ken would wave back, always with a joke or a funny face. He started calling her his little sunshine, and before long, Katie became his reason to drop by more often. What Owen and Caroline didn't realize at the time was just how much Katie meant to Ken. For them, Ken was the charming, eccentric neighbor who always had a story to tell. But for Ken, Katie was something more, a ray of light in what had become a rather lonely life. As Katie grew, so did her bond with Ken. Every week, Ken would bring over a small toy or book for Katie, just little things he thought she might like. For her second birthday, he brought over a giant stuffed lion, much taller than her, which she immediately named Elvis. Katie's love for Elvis, the stuffed lion, rivaled her love for Ken himself. The Williams family came to expect Ken's presence in their lives. He became like a grandfather figure to Katie, filling a gap they hadn't realized existed. It was no longer just casual neighborly exchanges. Ken became part of their family traditions, attending Katie's birthday parties, helping with their garden, and even coming over for Christmas dinner once. But as time went on, Ken's health began to fade. He was still the same spirited man in his mind, but his body was slowing down. The once frequent visits became less so, and eventually, Ken stopped coming around as much. Owen and Caroline tried to check in on him when they could, but Ken was a proud man. He didn't want anyone fussing over him. Then, one summer evening in 2018, Ken passed away. The news hit Owen and Caroline hard. They hadn't realized just how much they had come to care for the old man next door. For Katie, the loss was confusing. How do you explain to a toddler that the man who always made her laugh wasn't coming back? Katie kept asking where Grandpa Ken had gone. And each time, Owen and Caroline struggled to find the right words. The weeks that followed were quiet. The Williams family tried to move on, but there was an undeniable void in their lives. Ken had been such a constant presence, and now, without him, their neighborhood didn't feel quite the same. Then, one evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Ken's daughter, Jenny, whom they had only met briefly at the funeral. She stood on their doorstep, holding a large, bulging bin bag. The look on her face was one of both sadness and warmth. "Hi, Owen." "Carolyn," Jenny said softly. "I found something while going through Dad's things. It's for Katie." She handed the bag to them, and for a moment no one said anything. Owen looked down at the bag, confused. It wasn't until they opened it that the magnitude of what Ken had done hit them. Inside the bag were 14 Christmas presents. Each one was neatly wrapped in festive paper, and on each one Ken had written Katie's name. "These are for Katie," Jenny explained. "Dad wanted her to have one every Christmas until she turned 16. Caroline gasped, tears welling up in her eyes. Owen was speechless. Ken had planned all of this. Before he passed, he had gone out and bought gifts for Katie for the next decade of her life. It was his way of ensuring that even though he wouldn't be there in person, he would still be a part of her Christmases, still a part of her life. As Jenny left, Owen and Caroline sat on the couch, staring at the bag of gifts in stunned silence. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Ken, the quirky old man next door, had left a legacy of love for their daughter that would last for years. The first Christmas without Ken came, and with it, the first of his gifts. Katie, too young to understand the full significance, unwrapped a beautifully illustrated book. Owen and Caroline watched her, tears in their eyes, as she gleefully flipped through the pages, completely unaware of how much love had gone into that gift. Every year after, it became a tradition. Katie would open one of Ken's gifts on Christmas Eve, and with each one, Owen and Caroline would share stories about the man who had given them. As Katie grew older, she began to understand the depth of what Ken had done for her. These weren't just toys or books. They were pieces of a man's heart, left behind for her to cherish. One year, she opened a train set with her name carefully carved into the pieces. Another year, it was a beautiful doll dressed in hand-sewn clothes. Each gift was chosen with such care, such thoughtfulness. And every Christmas, Katie would sit by the tree, her face lighting up as she unwrapped the next piece of Ken's legacy. For the Williams family, Ken's memory became a part of their Christmas traditions. He was gone, but in a way, he was still with them, through the gifts, the stories, and the love he had left behind. As the years passed, the gifts became even more meaningful. By the time Katie was a teenager, The story of Ken Watson and his Christmas presents had become something of a family legend. Every year they would gather around the tree, and Katie would open one of Ken's gifts, her heart full of gratitude for a man who had cared so deeply for her. And then, finally, the last Christmas came. The year Katie turned 16. She unwrapped the final gift, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this would be the last time Ken's love would arrive in a wrapped box. Inside was a simple locket, engraved with the words, "Always with you." Tears filled Katie's eyes as she held the locket in her hand, knowing that, in a way, Ken would always be with her. Ken Watson's legacy wasn't just about the gifts, it was about love, kindness, and the way one person can make a lasting impact on another's life. He may not have been around to see Katie grow up, but through his thoughtfulness, he ensured that she would always remember him. As the story comes to a close, we're reminded that the simplest acts of kindness can leave the deepest impressions. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please consider subscribing to our channel. Like this video, leave a comment below, and share your own stories of kindness. Because in a world that sometimes feels too fast-paced, it's these moments of love and thoughtfulness that remind us what really matters.